Before the story of humankind began, there was silence. A planet of wind and dust, of thunder and rain, turning slowly beneath a young sun. The continents were restless, colliding, drifting apart, shaping valleys where destiny would one day walk. Africa breathed first. Its great rift tore open the skin of the earth, exposing the bones of creation itself. Here, in the ancient cradle of valleys and volcanic plains, time was patient, waiting for an idea to take shape in flesh. Millions of years before we learned to name ourselves, life was already experimenting, tinkering with form, with motion, with the possibility of awareness. Forests rose and fell. Climates shifted. Species came and vanished, each one leaving behind a faint whisper in the sediments of memory. Among those early primates were beings who looked almost like us, but not yet. They clung to trees, to safety, to the rhythm of leaves and light. Their hands were clever, their eyes forward, but the world was changing beneath their feet. Forests giving way to open savannas, to wide spaces where survival demanded something new. In those open lands, standing upright was not just an accident. It was adaptation, to see farther, to carry food, to travel across the burning plains. The earth was selecting for vision, for endurance, for courage. And in that quiet selection, a new posture emerged, the first step toward what we would become. They were small, barely a meter tall, their brains no larger than a chimpanzee's. Yet within them was a spark, the potential for reflection, for persistence, for becoming. These were the Australopithecines, the southern apes of Africa, and among them, a creature later named Australopithecus afarensis. She would walk into history as Lucy. Not a name she knew, but a song we gave her. She lived more than 3 million years ago, 3 million heartbeats of evolution before us. Her bones tell a story written in calcium and dust. Knees angled for walking, hands still suited for grasping, a body halfway between earth and sky. In her stride, the planet itself seemed to awaken. Each footprint pressed into wet volcanic ash was a message to the future, that intelligence begins not in the head, but in the motion of survival. The wind moved over grasslands. The sky turned from red to gold. And life simply kept walking. The Great Rift Valley, a scar and a cradle. A wound in the Earth's surface stretching for thousands of miles. From the highlands of Ethiopia to the plains of Kenya and beyond. Here, tectonic forces tore the continent apart. But in that breaking, something extraordinary was born. Rivers began to carve new paths. Lakes shimmered in the sunlight like ancient mirrors. Volcanoes erupted, scattering ash that would one day preserve the footprints of our ancestors. And through this restless landscape, evolution found both a challenge and an opportunity. The forests thinned. Where there had once been shade and abundance, there was now openness and scarcity. Creatures that could adapt, those who could move farther, think faster, endure longer, would survive. Those who could not would vanish. Among the survivors were the Australopithecines, small, upright, watchful. They lived between worlds, half in the trees, half on the ground. They scavenged, they searched, they learned to wait. Every motion, every choice carved a new pattern in the story of life. It is in this time that Australopithecus africanus and Australopithecus afarensis flourished. They were not yet human, but the blueprint was forming. Their pelvis reshaped for walking. Their hands, shorter, stronger, capable of holding objects with intention. Their eyes forward, scanning horizons that no creature had dared to cross. Predators watched them. Leopards, saber-toothed cats, and crocodiles hunted the vulnerable. But these beings learned a different kind of defense. Awareness. They began to sense patterns. The call of danger in the distance. The shift of the wind that meant rain. The subtle alignment of stars that returned with the seasons. This awareness was not yet thought, not yet reflection. But it was the seed of both. In their quiet endurance, nature was sculpting a new kind of intelligence, not born of strength, but of observation. And over countless generations, another leap occurred. Among the Australopithecines, a lineage emerged with hands that lingered longer on the world. Hands that could modify, could shape, could remember the gesture that made survival easier. The first stone was not just a weapon. It was an idea, a thought carved into matter, a signal that the brain was beginning to transform. Neurons firing in new patterns, connections forming between perception and action. Somewhere in the Rift Valley, under the glare of a hot African sun, a creature picked up a stone and struck it against another, shattering it into shards. One edge was sharp, useful, intentional, and in that single act, something irreversible began. That being would later be known as Homo habilis, the handyman, the first maker of tools, the first to shape the world around him with purpose. From this simple act, striking stone upon stone, a chain of consequences was set in motion. Tools meant food, food meant time, time meant thought, and thought would change everything. As the sun sank behind the Rift Valley, a small group of these early humans gathered near a patch of shade. They carried stones, bones, fragments, things they had touched, things that had touched them. No one spoke, not yet. But in their movements was rhythm, repetition, learning. The valley listened. The wind carried their future across the plains. It was the sound of beginnings, the murmur of minds about to awaken. The hand, simple, delicate, but infinite in its possibilities. It was through the hand that thought first learned to speak. Each motion, each grip, each strike of stone against stone was not only survival, it was communication. Homo habilis, the handyman, lived more than 2 million years ago. He was small, with a face still heavy with the echoes of the apes, but inside his skull, something extraordinary was unfolding. A brain growing larger, folding upon itself, creating pathways for memory, for imagination, for invention. The hands of Homo habilis turned stones into tools, and tools into extensions of intention. They cracked bones to reach the marrow, scraped hides from meat, and shaped edges that could cut, carve, defend. The landscape of Africa began to bear their signature, scattered tools in the dust, marks of presence, marks of mind. The making of tools was more than technique. It was a rehearsal for abstraction. To strike one stone upon another required foresight, a vision of what could be, a mind that saw not just the world as it was, but as it might become. And with that vision came another miracle: cooperation. To hunt, to gather, to survive, these early humans began to rely on one another. They formed groups that shared food, shared danger, shared knowledge. The boundaries between self and other began to blur. A new kind of bond emerged. The beginnings of empathy. It was here, in these fragile communities, that the roots of humanity took hold. One pair of hands struck stone, another watched and learned. Learning became inheritance, and inheritance became culture. The rhythm of their labor echoed across the savannah. Stone meeting stone, spark meeting spark. Each sound was a heartbeat in the body of evolution. Yet the world was merciless. Droughts came and went. Predators prowled. The Rift Valley trembled and shifted. Entire generations vanished without a trace. But the hands endured. From Homo habilis came new forms. Homo rudolfensis, then Homo erectus. Taller, stronger, a traveler born of necessity. These were the first true wanderers. Their legs could carry them for miles across open land. Their eyes read the movement of clouds and herds. Their minds carried maps unseen, of paths, of memories, of return. It was Homo erectus who learned to tame the wildest force of all, fire. No one knows how it began. A lightning strike perhaps, a tree set ablaze in the distance. But what matters is that someone watched. Someone dared to approach the light, to see not danger, but promise. They learned to keep it alive, to feed it, to protect it. Fire became warmth, and warmth became gathering. For the first time, the night belonged to them. Around the fire, shadows danced upon cave walls. Hands reached out toward the glow, eyes reflected the movement of flames, and perhaps, for the first time, recognized the reflection of thought. The hand that struck stone had now tamed light. The maker had become a guardian of time itself. Fire changed everything. It softened food, extended days, forged safety in the darkness. But above all, it forged imagination. As sparks rose into the sky, perhaps they saw them as stars, and wondered if they too were made of the same light. The mind was awakening, slowly, irrevocably. The silence of instinct was giving way to the murmur of reason. And somewhere, deep within the glow of that fire, the future of humanity stirred. The night is no longer a place of fear, but of wonder. Firelight flickers on faces that have begun to dream. The sparks rise, vanishing into the darkness above, and somewhere within those flames, a question begins to form. A question that will one day shape civilizations. What am I? It did not come as a word, not yet, but as a feeling, a pulse of awareness stirring in the mind. The beings who sat around those early fires were no longer bound entirely by instinct. Something within them had begun to watch itself. They remembered, they learned, they imagined. When dawn came, their eyes no longer saw only danger and food, but patterns, shapes, possibilities. Each sunrise was both the end of survival and the beginning of thought. Over countless generations, the brains of these early humans grew larger. Connections multiplied, between sight and memory, between action and consequence, between self and world. In the silence of those long ages, the architecture of consciousness was being built neuron by neuron. Emotion deepened, bonds strengthened. Mothers protected their young not only by instinct, but through affection. They mourned their dead, perhaps not with ceremony, but with presence, a lingering, a stillness. It was the first echo of empathy, the earliest trace of soul. Then came sound. At first, mere calls and cries, the language of need, of alarm, of desire. But slowly, these sounds began to take shape. The rhythm of footsteps, the breath between gestures, became patterns of meaning. The first words were not carved in stone or painted on walls. They were carried on air, shared in the space between one being and another. Language was born, not as a tool, but as a bridge. With words, memory became collective. Knowledge could travel beyond death. Fire taught them to see. Language taught them to remember. And then, art. Long before paint or pigment, art began in the imagination. The same hands that shaped stone began to shape ideas. The curve of an animal, the memory of a hunt, the vision of something beyond reach. When they finally drew upon cave walls, the first lines, the first symbols, it was not decoration, it was revelation. They were saying, we were here, we saw, we understood. In those ancient marks, we glimpsed the awakening of the inner world. Thought had found a mirror, and for the first time, humanity was able to see itself reflected in meaning. Each brush of pigment, each carved bone or polished stone was an attempt to preserve the invisible, to make the intangible tangible. This was the birth of culture, of myth, of story. The great silence of nature was broken, not by thunder, but by imagination. And with imagination came a terrible, beautiful truth. To imagine is also to know that one will end. Awareness brought awe and fear. To look at the stars and wonder is to know that one exists, and to know that one will not always be. But they did not turn away from that truth. They carried it, like fire in their hands. That is what it meant to become human. From the plains of Africa to the caves of Europe, from the rising of the first fires to the painting of the first dreams, the hominid had crossed a threshold. The world was no longer merely a place to survive. It was a place to mean something. From movement came everything. Long before language, before art, before thought itself, there was walking. Each step, each journey across an endless plain was an act of faith, To move was to believe that something lay beyond the horizon, and that belief became our greatest inheritance. For millions of years, the descendants of those first wanderers spread across the world. Out of Africa they went, following rivers, coasts, the migration of herds, carrying with them the memory of fire, of stone, of kinship. They crossed deserts, climbed mountains, braved ice and storm, and wherever they went, they left a trace, a footprint, a tool, a dream. The body evolved, but so did the mind. With every new environment came new challenges, and with every challenge, new ideas. The hunters of the plains became the gatherers of the forest, the fishermen of the coasts, the storytellers of the night. Through cooperation, they built trust. Through memory, they built culture. Through imagination, they built the future. And then, somewhere along that endless journey of becoming, a new species emerged, Homo sapiens, the thinking being, the one who knows that he knows. They looked not only at the earth beneath their feet, but at the sky above, and in the movement of clouds, in the rhythm of seasons, they saw patterns, they saw meaning. From that seeing came everything we now call civilization. But behind all of it, behind language, fire, art, and reason, was that same ancient impulse that began in the Rift Valley so long ago, to move forward, to search, to connect. Even as we built walls, we kept looking for the horizon. Even as we learned to fly, we still dreamed of walking on other worlds. The legacy of the first hominid is not a fossil, nor a tool buried in the dust. It is the persistence of curiosity, the refusal to stop evolving. Every city skyline, every idea written in light, every heartbeat beneath this same sun is part of that same motion, that same quiet rebellion against stillness. We are the children of movement, of adaptation, of memory. We are the continuation of that first upright step taken on the plains of Africa, when a creature looked across the grass and saw possibility instead of fear. In that moment, the earth began to dream of itself, and though eons have passed and continents have changed their shapes, that dream endures, in our questions, in our creations, in our endless search for meaning. Because evolution never truly ended, it simply learned to think. And so, as you listen to these words, as your own breath mirrors the rhythm of 1 billion years of survival, remember this: you are not separate from that story. You are its latest verse. The day the first hominid appeared was not the beginning of humanity. It was the beginning of awareness. A spark that still burns, in every mind, in every motion, in every act of wonder that asks, quietly, who are we? And where will we go next?